I'm going to encourage everyone to please stick around for the keynote speaker. You will not want to miss this. I'm Michelle Harper with Air Lessons, and I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Don Schmincke. I can speak from experience that Don's research and insights about leadership offer a fresh yet scientific and evidence-based approach to driving superior growth and performance within a company. His methods get to the heart of what really works and why most things tried in the past don't. His book, High Altitude Leadership, should be a must-read for anyone in management. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. As a best-selling author, Don can be found sharing these unique methods on leadership at keynote speeches like ours, or implementing them with clients across every industry, including healthcare, manufacturing, technology, finance, communications, distribution, insurance, and even nonprofits. Don's an MIT and Johns Hopkins researcher who's led quite an adventurous life. He was nearly arrested as a capitalist spy in the Soviet Union, got shot off an aircraft carrier, survived in the Kurdish capital as the Ayatollah held hostages in Tehran, and developed missile inertial guidance systems while his frat brothers took Vegas, later portrayed in the movie 21. So, forget every book that you've ever read on management theories, keys to leadership, strategic growth, building blocks for company success, and the like. And for the moment, please open your mind to a new way of looking at effective leadership under the topic, Unearthing the New Leader's Code, What Samurais, Summits, and Science Teach Us About Victory. Don Schmincke.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed in my hotel room there was one of those battery charged lights in case there's they have weather here and everything gets blown out. But I thought, you know what, if anything happens, I'm with the Candle Association. I mean, this is the best place to lose power, right? Anyway, thanks for having me. I want to tell you a little bit about our work, but I have to tell you, I'm not supposed to be here because, you know, not too many planetary physicists end up teaching leadership stuff. But when I was at MIT, I began studying the closest planet to us. That's where this all began. And you know which one that is, right? Yeah, it's the one we're standing on. This is the closest planet to us. And I noticed humans because they were so fascinating. They were so nonlinear and irrational. And they tell me some of you have humans in your organizations. Is that true? Did you? What were you thinking? And of all the mammals you could hire, you chose this one. This is the hardest mammal to control. So this took me into other areas of research, and we began looking at humans. And what was interesting about humans is they tend to group in these mercantile systems, and which we now call business today. And I wanted to find out how that was working. So I began studying grouping behavior, and as I did that, I ran into a number of management experts and a number of executives and business owners. And I started hearing certain complaints from you, basically. What I was hearing was that you were asking, you know, why is it that all these management theories that we see published every year have a success rate of only 30%? And when I started doing literature studies, a lot of the studies on the success rates of management theory are around 30%. Now, some CEOs say, well, that's a wildly inflated number. It's actually less than that. But then we started looking at companies and how companies would use the same methods, the same processes, the same strategies, and yet some would thrive and some would not. So there was something missing around how to lead companies to strategic growth. So that's how I got here, was actually looking to help organizations grow faster. And we ran into some problems, though, because these failure rates are really getting on everybody's nerves. So what we decided to do was take a different approach. I had a number of, I was speaking to a lot of CEO groups at the time, and they said, why don't you start over? Why don't you stop trying to learn about modern management theory because the failure rates are too high. Start over. Act like it's a new planet. You know, you're a scientist. Go figure it out. And so that changed everything for us. Because what we decided to do is I put together a team of anthropologists, geneticists, neurologists, and evolutionary psychologists. And we started looking at you and observing you. So I'm here to tell you what we've learned so far. Most of what we discussed today will be politically incorrect, but scientifically defensible. So I just want to prepare you for that. Now, you have a handout here. So what I want to do, did everybody get a handout? Okay. What I'm going to do, the second page is just a brief bio on me, but the third page, I want to take a look at a model that we discovered that I think will help. And it came out of working with you and looking at this issue of leadership, because you want to grow your companies faster, you want to increase your organizational performance, but we noticed that you can't do it alone, and you need great leaders around you. So there were certain behaviors you wanted to see, and as you get experience in industry, you kind of know what behaviors you're looking for. So let's do a real quick, just a 2-minute exercise. I'd like you to get together with 2 or 3 people around you, and I want you to answer a question. What are the ideal leadership behaviors you want to see in your organization? What are those behaviors that you have found in your experience are the ones that can help a company perform better? So okay, take 2 minutes, gather up in small groups. I'm going to come back and capture your data later, but go ahead and do that. Ideal leadership behavior, what's that look like? I can, I'm on to about 12, is that right? 12 o'clock? I'm on to 12. What do you have something else? No, that's okay. All right. All right, let's come on back. Let's see what you got. I know you only a couple minutes, but I'm trying to get through some stuff here with you to make sure we capture everything in the short time we have together. So, what came out of your group? What were some of the things that came up? What did you hear? Yes.
Between us, we like our leaders to own it, take charge and own it.
Own it. What else?
Lead by example.
What else?
Results-oriented leaders.
Yes, results.
There's the fuzzy stuff, compassion, honesty.
Sure. Compassion. Who cares, really? Honesty. All right, good, thanks. All right, I'm sure there's going to be overlap. What else? How about somebody over here? What came out of your groups? Anybody? Yes?
Good listening skills.
Uh-huh.
Team builder.
Listen, team, good.
Knowledge is objective.
Knowledge. What else? Anything else?
Diplomatic.
Okay.
Being fair.
Diplomatic and fairness. Good. All right. Who else? Let's take one more group. Vision, yes. Another one, yes. Sorry? Fun, yes. Gotta have fun. All right. Second question. These are all good behaviors. We hear these a lot, and this is terrific. However, when we started noticing you, when the motivational speakers all went home and all the best-selling books went back on the shelves, you started going working with your humans, and you started complaining. We heard you complaining about other behaviors you classified as annoying, behaviors that were a little frictional, a little frustrating. So talk to me about that. What happens? What actually happens when you have to go back and work with your humans? What do they do when they're not doing the ideal behavior? The doors are closed, we can be honest. So let's say distracted, right? Because it could be other things. Good, distracted, like texting, etc. What else are they doing that annoy you? Sorry? Oh, gossip, yes. Gossip. Others? Micromanage. Good. Others? Narcissism, right. And when they're being narcissistic, how do they act? Like, very selfish, huh? Do you notice them playing political behavior sometimes that are occurring in human groups? They got politics going on. So they got selfish. What are some favorite political games when they're playing politics? What do you notice? Cliques, right. What else? CYA, I hear that a lot. CYA going, yeah, CYA. What else? I'm sure there's more. Turf battles? You hear that? Sorry? Oh, but it says turf battles and the silos. You guys don't have any problems with entitlement attitudes, do you, in your industry? Oh, okay, we'll just put that down. Entitlement, blaming, finger pointing. We hear them all. But here's the issue, and the reason I'm doing this exercise is to look at what we ran into when we started observing you. And what happened is we noticed you were struggling with this gap, okay, between the ideal and the actual. Now, we also noticed that you tried fixing this gap before, haven't you? I mean, you tried coaching people, giving them performance feedback, having them read books, doing training, getting, all this stuff you had done. However, we noticed one thing from all those efforts. This gap still showed up. So one of the things we found out was that it's not your fault, so you can relax. We discovered a few things that were not published in any of the management literature. And one of those things was this: the gap's not your fault because it's been there for over 5,000 years. So you can all relax. Yes, these are the oldest stories in humanity. And I think that's odd. I mean, imagine going back to your office 5,000 years ago. And you walk in and one of your employees comes in and says, "Hey, I want to introduce you to a new hire. His name's Joe." And you're like, "Hey, welcome to the company, Joe. What do you do?" He goes, "Well, I'm a scribe." And you're like, "What the heck's a scribe? I mean, did we have that position open?" And Joe describes, we put together these symbols, and each symbol has a sound. We all agree on the sound per symbol, put the symbol in a row, got a word. Make a bunch of words, get a sentence. So you get to write it down, and you don't have to go tell those guys what to do anymore. You can just send them your symbols. And you're like, "Wow, what a great productivity improvement." What's next? Email? I mean, you're really excited. "Oh, but Joe can write what you say in stone so it'll last for thousands of years. They'll read about your wisdom thousands of years from now. They'll think like you're a god." And you're thinking, "Wow, I could be a god today. This is perfect." So what do you want Joe to write? And out of all the things you could have espoused to the wisdom of the ages, you decided instead to bitch and moan and complain about these behaviors. I think that's fascinating. But today, we still will spend time and money trying to close this gap, right? Last count, about $300 billion spent trying to close a gap that has been there for over 5,000 years. Why do we do that? I think it's because of this. I think it's because of the human capacity to hope and endure and strive and persevere. So ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to do this morning is end all hope. I want to be your first demotivational speaker. How am I doing so far? Well, thanks for letting me play with you here, but I wanted to get this set up because I want to show you what we found out in terms of observing you and developing this model that apparently your ancestors have used for thousands of years. And for some reason, it's not published, because one of the things we discovered is in these questions you were asking, why is it management theories are so difficult to consistently have performance? Why is it some companies are working, some companies are not? It's because I think we're teaching leadership wrong. And I was part of the problem because I was teaching it wrong, and I had to find out why we were having such a high failure rate situation. Now, what we had to do, though, is we had to first ask some questions, like, is it possible to even get here consistently? I mean, is it even possible to do that? And the answer was yes. There are companies today that operate here consistently. All 7 of them. Don't you hate those great company books they write every year? I mean, every year there's some best-selling book on great companies, and they got all these great company articles, right? But no author has ever footnoted, now correct me if I'm wrong, I might have missed someone, but I haven't seen a footnote where they said, warning, this list will change in 18 to 36 months. Right? Have you seen the footnote? I haven't seen the footnote. So we thought, why don't we stop studying the successes and instead start doing autopsies? So we began doing autopsies, we began looking at the failures, and we discovered some fascinating principles, some fascinating insights. I want to share with you what we've learned about that so far. Now, the first thing we had to do, though, is because, executives told us to start over, so we're starting over. We had to find out what was consistent throughout history that would help us justify great leadership, or at least become aware of how it works. And what we discovered was that you're not consistent. That was the first problem. We found out that your leadership is somewhat, let's just say it changes depending on your understanding of physics. Yes, no one's ever published that either. I don't know why it's missing in the management text, but it's so obvious. Depending on how you see the world from a point of view of physics and how the universe works determines how you run your companies. Now let's go back about 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Here we are being led to increase market share. And most of that market share is from moving forward, mainly north out of Africa, east and west. So the people that were leading those various tribes, those various groups into new regions and new markets were using concepts like the gods and the forces of nature. Now, the History Channel actually did a show on one of these groups to kind of show how you did lead. It's called Vikings. Anybody see the Viking series on TV? Okay, so a few of you have. The rest of you, personal action summary, binge Vikings this weekend, put that down, binge Vikings. Because you'll see what they have done from an archaeological and anthropologically accurate representation of how you used to lead 1,000 years ago. And you'll see what it was like. I mean, it was like the gods and the forces of nature. Now, Isaac Newton shows up centuries later, and he starts this thing called Newtonian physics. And now all of a sudden, well, it's not really about the gods. It's about a machine. The universe is a machine. Here are the parts. Here's how they interact. And Newtonian physics is born. And so you start running your companies like a machine. Yes, you started using words like structure and leverage and projection and a lot of mechanical terms. Some of you use those terms still today, right? And then about the past 10 years, we've had the new quantum field theories coming out of the high energy laboratories. And so you got these management books now, like the new leadership science. And so now we're back to gods and energies again. They're so inconsistent. But what is consistent about leaders, about executives, about people that are running businesses? Well, we finally found something we can count on. When you achieve a leadership role in your company, you actually get infected with a mental disorder. We call it the results syndrome. It's kind of like a hyper-result syndrome. All of a sudden, your brain magnifies results in time and space. Have you noticed all of a sudden you want to see results that go past next Friday? Or maybe beyond your immediate village, or city, or state, or maybe country. Yes, see, in your mind, results have expanded. So now we have a place to begin. Results. So then we had to find out, well, how do you get results? And we noticed you spent time in 2 areas. You spent time looking at, well, what do we have to do differently to get better results? And how do we do it differently? And so we started noticing your behaviors here. On the what stuff, you spent time like evolving the content or the informational patterns of your organization. It might look like, hey, we need to set some goals this year. We need to have some plans to achieve those goals. We need to establish some metrics to track progress. We need to structure our teams a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Good stuff. You also spend a lot of time here on how work gets done, right? How can we do work better? Do we have the right processes in place? Are people trained to work at the level we need them to work? And are they following the policies and the work procedures that need to be followed? Do we have a continuous improvement program or a quality initiative to improve those procedures? Do we have the systems in place to make sure that work is supported? Things like that. Now, all makes sense. But this is where you spend your average day, isn't it? This is your day. So we still got a problem, the failure rates. So we thought, well, wait a minute, maybe one of the problems is that you don't have enough access to the sources of insight around what and how to run a business better. And one of the best ways to get access is through business books. So maybe there's not enough books published for you, and that's the problem. It's this lack of information. We went to New York to study the publishing industry. We found out the number of business books published is 35,000 annually. Yeah, 35,000 a year. So we had to conclude there's probably enough books for you to read. But still we have a problem. This is when the anthropologists came on board. And we explained what we were running into. How do we get consistent results? The failure rates are too high. And they said, well, I think we see the problem. I said, great, now we're going to make some progress. I said, what's the problem? They said, you're an idiot. I'm like, I'm an idiot. Why am I an idiot? He says, you're asking the wrong question. See, these are just the tools for getting results. But tools don't drive results. A fool with a tool is still a fool. You can write that down too, like that. You probably have people throwing tools back at the office right at a problem and hoping it all goes away. So here's the problem with tools. They can be very seductive. In fact, when we were doing our last book, High Altitude Leadership with NBC, Chris Warner, who was my co-author, is probably one of the top rescue climbers in the world. And I met Chris climbing in the Andes, and we were close to 20,000 feet on top of this summit. It was the mountain's called Cotopaxi. It's the highest active volcano in the world. And I don't know if you ever climbed a cone before to about 20,000 feet, but it is a freaking hard time because every step you take is worse than the one you took before. So it's a long 7 hours. You ever do a Stairmaster for 7 hours? Okay, another homework exercise. But you have to tie a plastic bag over your head to remove the oxygen, and that gives you an idea. But it was here that I had this idea of how can we understand human biological leadership if it's so contaminated by culture. But one of the ways to strip away culture is to put you in death zone environments. These are above 8,000 meters. Because if you're in a death zone environment, you just want to get out of a death zone environment. You don't care about motivational speakers anymore or best-selling books. And then we can look at your reactions. So NBC was going to help us because Chris is going to take on K2, which death to summit ratio. In mountaineering, every mountain has an indicator called death to summit ratio. What a great sport. Well, Everest is a few percent, but K2 is like 33%. So it's like 10 times higher. So about 1/3 of the climbers won't come back. Chris is going to take this on with NBC. They're going to link him to me. I'm not going. I'm going to be back in my living room in Baltimore. But it was a risk I was willing to take. Thank you. And so what happened is we wrote the book live for you as he was on the Death Mountain. This was his third attempt. He had failed twice before. And what we noticed is when he was pulling bodies off of mountains, they were clutching their tools. They were dead and frozen, but they were clutching their tools. And we began to see the same thing with companies. Companies that were just clutching their tools as they died. And this began to show us that there was something called tool seduction that puts us in a place where we focus on these things, hoping that these are going to save us. But the anthropologist said that's not what drives results in companies. And that's what's probably driving these high failure rates, because what really drives results was this, and this changed the trajectory of our research forevermore. Human behavior drives results, particularly as expressed in human decision. Now think about that. it doesn't really matter how much time you spend in the what and how. If it fails to alter human decision, you have wasted everything. This would also mean that every problem you face, every challenge, every issue or concern you have about your business, could that all be due to a decision a human made? Yes. It's all about human decision. So what this did is it opened up a new world for us, because we now had to explore what is it that drives human decision. Because if we can figure that out, we can get our humans, our employees, our customers, our suppliers to make the decisions we want, and we can use the tools to get the results and achieve happiness. Because that's why you want results. It causes a physiological reaction. Have you noticed that when you get the results you want, you seem to have this experience of happiness? And when you're not getting the results you want, how do you feel? Pissed, angry, frustrated. So it's purely a mental state for happiness, and this is your secret for getting there. But we have to answer the question, don't we? If we could get everyone to exhibit the behavior, make the decisions that we want, and that will lead us to happiness and results, then what is it that drives it? And this is where they said, Don, well, not so fast, because you don't understand. This actually can't be seen until you get what this means. I said, what do you mean what this means? They said, well, if this is true, it means results don't exist. We made them up. Your companies, ladies and gentlemen, are figments of your imagination. Yeah, no, we had a problem with this too. So we would drag these anthropologists into your companies, and they would look around, and I say, see, here's a company. And they would look around and say, I don't see a company. I say, well, what do you see? They say, we just see people moving things. Where's the company? Moving paper, machines, equipment, inventories, whatever. They're just moving stuff. And that's actually all you're going to see tomorrow when you go back to the office, because I called your people. You're going to go in and like, wow, they're just moving stuff, aren't they? So where's the company? Well, frustrated, I said, okay, you want to see a thing called a company? We'll go to the state office building downtown. We were in the U.S., and we know every company that gets formed has to file a piece of paper with the state to become incorporated. So we're going to go to the state office building. I'll show you a thing called a company. And they said, we're not going to waste our time. I said, why not? They said, because we made the entire state up. That doesn't exist. I said, wait a minute, it's part of the United States of America, right? We didn't make it up, did we? I mean, the United States wasn't made up, was it? Yeah, I was in a corner. I couldn't run anywhere. Of course it was. That's why a lot of it. How many people here from the U.S.? Okay, so you got up this morning, and the first thought you had was, thank God we get rid of the king, right? That's such a short attention span. It was only a couple hundred years ago, you had a sole source from England. You get an open bid to France or Spain. And then what did the king ship you? Well, I did some research in Williamsburg, looked at the British Archives of Inventory Shipments. They had an interesting quality control program. If they do not meet British standards, we'll send it to the colonies. They'll take anything. So most of what you received were damaged goods. Oh, and we'll tax them on it, by the way. We'll tax them on production and shipping, and tax. Thank God that'll never happen again. Some days I think we should go back to the Queen and say, we're sorry, we made a mistake. It was an experiment. But anyway, so we got upset, and he decided to do something no one had ever done before to the King of England. We're going to tell him we're going to leave the family business. Yes, you're going to leave the family business. He decided to send him a one-page business plan to tell him how you're going to do that. Remember that? And to piss them off, you put something at the top of the page. What did you do at the top of the page of the one-page business plan? The king would see and get upset because you're changing the order of things in the world. And he guesses what you did at the top of the page. It was the first line, the largest font. We the people was a good guess, but it was actually the line above that. Higher. The first line was in Congress, comma, and the date. And what did you do with the date? You wrote it backwards. You wrote it wrong. You wrote it incorrectly. You put the month first. Yeah, you really did. You still don't write it with the month first, do you? The war's over. You're not trying to do that anymore. You ever leave the country, they make fun of you? Yeah, they make fun of you. Hey, is it a day? Is it a month? It's not that complicated. The small to large, just say, hey, mate, calm down. I'm making a statement to the king, all right? You drive on that side, we're driving on this side. So when you drive home today, viva la revolution against England. So you got upset. Threw some tea in Boston Harbor. I could never understand why it was tea, but one of our expeditions was to study the northern reaches of the Roman Empire, and which is in Newcastle, England. So I get up to Newcastle, England, I hired this anthropologist. The Romans got up there and built a new castle. They had a great naming convention. That's why they called it Newcastle. But I also noticed that something in the square. It was a statue of a guy named Earl Grey. Have you heard this name before? I was like, I've heard this name. And he tells me Earl Grey actually found good tea because he hated British tea. The limestone in the soil made it sucky. And so this Chinaman said, hey, I'll get you good tea. And he got this great tea, and everybody wanted Earl Grey's tea. The problem is that they now needed more clean water in Newcastle, which increased the hygiene rate of Newcastle, and it expanded as a city to become the second city outside of Rome to achieve 1 million people. Yes. And then, of course, England ran out of tea. Everybody wants this freaking tea now, so they got to establish these city-states in various countries around the world. And the India Tea Trading Company was then formed and consumed by the good British government, and it became an international global power overnight because of tea. That's why we threw tea in Boston Harbor. So he gets upset. He sends in some troops. We have a battle, several battles actually, and all of a sudden he says, you're not worth it. You can become a country. Have at it. We're like, yay, we got a country. The problem is you run out of dirt, right? We had Maine to Florida mapped out, but we had to find new dirt. Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, all the way to California. And then we tell the humans, go out to the dirt, file a piece of paper. You get to have a company. So you all think you have companies. They were totally made up in a state that was made up, in a country that was made up. And you think it's real. Humans, they're so cute when they do that. You know, they find a piece of dirt and they say, hey guys, let's name the dirt. And then we say, oh yeah, okay. And then you pretend like it's a real thing. The point is, this is what the anthropologists are trying to get me to understand, why I was teaching leadership wrong. See, I was teaching leadership around what great leadership is and how to be a great leader. And that had nothing to do with great leadership, because what leadership is about creation. Leaders create countries. Leaders create civilizations. They create market share penetration strategies. They create sustainable competitive advantage. Once I understood that, then I understood Alexander, Cleopatra, Gandhi, Hannibal, Caesar, Genghis Khan. You see, these CEOs did wonderful things. In fact, some of these CEOs dominated the world-known markets in their lifetime. Shouldn't we be asking a different question? Like, what did you do, Alexander? What did you do, Caesar? Genghis Khan, what did you do to conquer the known world? Well, once I got the insight that the anthropologists were trying to lead me to, I understood the answer. They were creating. And what do great executives create to drive the decisions of their people? They create their beliefs. Belief creation became the secret that has driven human civilization for thousands of years. When you alter the beliefs of humans, you alter their decisions. You alter the decisions, you alter the results. Any questions? Now, what's interesting about this is we ended up not being able to understand this yet, because we still have more research to go on to, but we did find out that the tool seduction is why we stopped teaching it. And the reason for that was we found out that we like being here because it's safe. It's safe because this is the domain of analysis. And analysis makes us safe. It makes us feel like we have an understanding of the world and control of it. So we can have equations, checklists, formulas, textbooks, and run classes on how to be great leaders. The problem is that up here is a very dangerous place, because up here is the domain of art, and art has no checklist or formulas or equations or textbooks. Art is a dangerous world where we don't know. There is not the structure. Do you know any artists? How many people know artists here? Okay, a few of you do. The rest of you got to get out more. Let me ask you a question. Have you noticed these are miserable people? Artists are always trying to master their art, and they keep reaching to master it, and they keep slipping through their fingers. And we noticed that this was the cause of misery in a lot of artists. And that's why a lot of famous artists die, and they're not really happy. They're still striving. So by the time we're finished this morning, I want you to be miserable the rest of your life. Because I want you to be artistes. I want you to look at crafting in this dimension, because when you alter the beliefs of your staff, of your suppliers, your customers, you start altering their decisions. You can use the tools for sure, but you can get the results. And even though it's a painful journey, it is actually here we found one of the most incredible dimensions of success in a business live. It's passion. People with passion outmaneuver the rest. And passion lives in the beliefs that you create. So I want to spend the rest of our time looking at how to implement this in modern corporations. And this has been tested. We go through various civilizations around the world. We've certainly went back through history, and everything seemed to make sense. I think we're spending too much time with our tools. I think we're teaching leadership wrong, and I think we should be looking at the creation of beliefs. Any questions before we move on? All right. So, one of the areas we were looking at, we found there were a couple of common complaints. And one of the complaints was, well, how do I create great strategy? Because I do want to grow my business faster. I am being challenged by having to deal with various competitive forces. And I want my people to execute that strategy. And those are two good questions, because when you go into battle, you do want both edges of your sword sharpened. And the one edge is, do I have the strategy to win? And the other edge is, do we have the people to execute the strategy? Because if you get both of those sharp, you're going to be winning more. The area that we found out in terms of applying this model in the area of passion and focus for strategy, well, let's start with strategy on page 7. Let's turn to page 7 for a second. What we were running into around strategy for a business in terms of how to make it more successful and grow faster was we had to come to terms with the high failure rates of strategic planning. A survey came out about 15 years ago when we started getting into this and showed the success rate of strategic planning. The success rate was 10% in the United States, 10%. And then I'm teaching in the graduate school at Hopkins, and I'm actually teaching strategy, and I'm teaching that wrong, because Henry Mintzberg at McGill University publishes his several hundred-page book, The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning. So I'm running into a wall here, because now all of a sudden, you're asking us, hey, can you tell us how to fix this problem? And I don't know the answer. So we went back, and we started looking at what is it that could be missing that causes strategic planning to fail. And it actually came back to this model, because when we opened up your strategic planning documents, and every company's got a strategy plan, we saw something missing. There was no strategy in it. It was tactics. So one of the interesting things to look at is maybe your strategic plan is really a tactical plan. And there's nothing wrong with tactics. You need that for execution, but it's not strategy. You see, because there's nothing in there around how you're going to win. There's no definition of who the main enemy is and which battlefield you're on. And those were the three questions we saw your ancestors and today's successful companies asking. Where's the battlefield? Who's the enemy? How do we win? Unless you have that, you have no strategy. We found out that you're also using techniques that were very analytical, and that was the problem. That was the problem. Kenichi said it best in his research. True strategy lies beyond the reach of conscious analysis. True strategy lies beyond the reach of conscious analysis. This basically means the strategic planning we're doing in this country is wrong, because it's all analytical. He says it exists in the domain of intuition. Intuition, the shifting of beliefs. Now think about that for a second. When you open up your strategic plan, do you see intuition? Do you see how you're going to out-intuit the enemy's moves? Do you see how you're going to outmaneuver the enemy's moves? If you do not see that, you have no strategy. You have tactics. So this issue of intuition then showed us that strategy, like leadership, is an act of creation. It also started answering some questions, like why is it that successful companies that end up starting small and they end up dominating their industries violate expert opinion? You ever notice that? They actually violate what expert industry opinions are. And whenever I see a company do this, I go to look and see what were the beliefs that were different from the rest of the industry. Because, see, that's where you need to think about focusing, is to look at, let's use a model. It's a standard model we teach in business school, but I'm going to apply it not as an analytical model, but as a belief device. For instance, how do you segment the markets of your industry? Now, some of you might have market segmentation, but you might not have been challenged as to why that segmentation. Let me use an example. Southwest Airlines, I flew them in last night. Now, they're not supposed to be operating according to expert opinion. Yeah, that's why all the experts told United, American, Delta, and Continental, don't worry about that small Texas airline. They're going to fail because they violate airline protocol. And I'm an expert in airline protocol. Well, when the market capitalization of Southwest exceeded the market cap of all the airlines in America, the experts never returned the funds for their flawed advice. They kept the money. But it does beg the question, what was Kelleher seeing that was different in his segmentation? Well, the one thing was, he wasn't going after an airline. He was out to crush a CEO. His name is Craig. Craig was not the CEO of an airline. Who do you think Craig was CEO of? Greyhound Bus. Greyhound Bus. So in Kelleher's mind, the market segmentation was different than what all the airlines were looking at. He was looking at the segmentation of bus transportation. He wanted to crush Craig. So he needs a bus that goes faster and cheaper than Greyhound. I guess he has to park it at an airport because that's where they have their runway thing. You ever fly Southwest? You ever feel like you're getting on a bus? Yeah, getting on a bus. Why do you think Southwest flight routes mimic Greyhound bus schedules? I'm asked to be on boards a lot, and one of the boards was an investment banking firm out of New York, Dallas, and Chicago. And I went to meet one of the other board members at a nice, elegant business luncheon. Sitting next to me is Craig, the former CEO of Greyhound. So, of course, in my own delicate way, I leaned over and said, "What happened to you, you poor son of a bitch?" He looks and says to me, he says, "It was a freaking bloodbath." He said, "I did not know Kelleher was coming after me personally, but when he targeted one of my cities, I had a 30% market hemorrhage in 24 hours. How'd you like to lose 30% in 24 hours? I said, "Well, how'd you know he was coming after you, Craig?" He said, "By the third city. By the third city, I knew we were under attack." I said, "Well, what'd you do?" He says, "We got ahead of the curve. We looked at his next targets. We knew where he was going next, and we started changing scheduling and routes and pricing." So, that's how we had to cope with that attack. All the other airlines are spinning around wondering, what is he doing? What's he doing? What's he doing? So, he's shifting his beliefs about where he's going. He's on a different battlefield than you guys. And then, what happened? Seduction takes over. So then, all the major airlines duplicates Southwest structures and processes. Remember that? I think United had something called TED, and Delta had something, and everybody had their Southwest look-alike. Now, I was on stage at a conference down the road here in Miami for the World Aviation Conference. I'm sharing the stage with two executives from Southwest Airlines. Now, we had never met before, but it was great they got up before me because they had a slideshow, and the slideshow had half a dozen of those Southwest knockoffs that all the major airlines did. And then they had another picture, dead, 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 dead. How could it be that half a dozen airlines, copying exactly what Southwest was doing, how did they die? Well, if we look at the model, it becomes clear. Southwest was being driven by this. It wasn't the tools. So it's a good example of how tool seduction takes us off course, kind of keeps us from thinking about intuitive strategy and how we can outmaneuver the enemy. And it's not the first time, but you'll see this in various situations, because once you have that, you really want to look at your products and your services as they go across these segments, because what we found out is that you do want to focus on those areas where you have margin, market growth, you have competitive advantage. These are the things that should be in your strategic plan. Growth, where's the growth in the market? I was working in India with a client. I learned a phrase that I thought was very helpful. Even a dead body keeps up with a flowing river. So if the market's exploding, you're probably going to get swept up. We do, however, when we work with companies, we work with dozens of companies a year and helping them grow their companies 2, 3, or 10 times faster. Here's one of the things we find out. We find out that a lot of companies are fighting battles where they're losing margins, the market's flattening, they don't have any advantage. And we ask them, why are you doing that when you should be withdrawing? So another insight from this morning is, could some of you be fighting battles you should not be fighting? And if you're fighting battles you should not be fighting, you should think of doing what all the great generals and admirals do. Withdraw your assets, reposition, and reattack. Find the targets where you can win. This also provides you a belief shift on where you're going tomorrow. And this is another part of what we see in improving strategic planning in corporations, and that is choosing the battlefield of tomorrow. Because some of you may say, hey, look, mergers and acquisitions, we're going to stay in the box. Or products and services into new markets. Or we're going to sustain the markets we've chosen by adding more value and more services and products there, or diversification. So now, if I could call your executive team into the room, could they tell me which vector you're on? If they cannot tell me that, you have no strategy. See, this is a belief shift. And this is why you can't do things like SWOT. You know, it's like SWOT analysis and all. And we see that happen. You go off for 2 days, and you do these analytical exercises, and you create a mission and objectives and actions, and that's your strategic plan, but it's not strategic, it's tactical, because in the strategic area, the SWOT changes depending on your vector. You can't do this after you do a SWOT, you must do it before. You could say, hey, I got 2 days off site, we had a great SWOT strategic planning session for our upcoming tank battle. I'm like, yeah, but you chose submarine warfare. Tanks don't resurface easily. You ever see the movie Patton? Remember the movie Patton with George C. Scott? Look at the reruns. There's a section in the movie where he's going up against Rommel in North Africa. Now, Rommel is the expert in tank battle strategy. He's written the books. So this guy knows what and how to do tank battles. So you're reading his textbook at the academy. Okay, Patton's got to go up against him. What's he going to do? Well, he engages, and in the movie, he takes a winning position in North Africa, and he shouts out something. You remember what he shouts out? He says, Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. Now, what does he mean by that? Does he mean I read your book so I know what and how to do it better, or I read your book because I wanted to know what you believe about tank battles? And that's what you should be thinking. What do we believe about the battles in our industry? And how do we change them? Because as you look at the different vectors and you shift your beliefs around that, it also allows you to look at your enemies differently as well. This is your company. We find that a lot of you are focused on rivals. So we do strategic planning this way because we had to start doing it differently because the failure rates were too high. And so it gave us a chance to see you and see hundreds of companies, and a lot of focus was on rivals. But about 35 years ago, an economist called Porter said, what about new entrants coming in? They're not in your business. They come and they shift the basis of competition. Then you have substitute products Okay, that could price cap you. Then you got supplier forces, and then you've got sacrilegiously the customer forces. The customer could be an enemy. Some of you might have enemy customers because their bargaining power is higher than yours, and they have force over you, and it tends to squeeze the margins. And then you look at forces surrounding these. You've got globalization happening. You've got new technologies emerging. You've got shifting social, political demands and demographics, and you've got regulatory issues. You've got economic policy changes. You've got information weaponry change. I mean, all these forces. Now you have to choose one, and that requires intuition. You cannot fight all these enemies. So where's the battlefield? That's a belief change. But what's your biggest enemy on that field of battle? Another belief change. So we begin to see that the failure rate of strategic planning has to do with that we're not asking the right questions. We're not finding out how to win. We're just reacting tactically to our circumstances. We had a data analytics company out of Chicago in the banking industry. Customer feedback on loyalty programs and marketing programs. They were going up against their rivals. Guy comes up to me during a break. He says, "Never done this before. Can you do our strategic planning this year?" I says, "Well, thank you. That's how we fund our research. We don't take your tax money. We take it directly from you." So the problem is, he said, "I can't afford to pay you." I said, "Well, this could be an issue." But I found out that he was an offshoot of a company that I loved when I was a kid. The S&H Grain Stamp Company. Anybody remember the S&H Grain Stamp Company? Yeah, I see some people, some of the younger kids are like, what? Well, that's, you fill those stamps in those books, sent it in for a prize. Well, this was an offshoot, so I said, "Look, I'm going to help you." So I got a position on the board, took a small equity position. Here's what happened next. It's another example of this belief thing being applied. They thought it was their other data analytics rivals. It wasn't. It was really the customer. Top 3 banks were suppressing the pricing. The competition was too fierce. So they had to change their beliefs of where they were going on the field of battle. They were trying to do this. They were trying to add value to the banking markets. That's not going to work. But who else wants to know about their customers that way? We did some beachheads, found 2 took off, restaurant chains, retail chains. We had a new vector. This was the vector. And when they chose that vector, they ended up losing their top 3 banking clients. But they went from $5 million in revenue, losing $500,000 a year, to $25 million in revenue, making several million in net profit. Beyond a year and a half ago, we decided to say, fine, now we've achieved that. What's next? Mergers, acquisitions. We're now close to $50 million. Now, going from $5 million near bankruptcy to $50 million and highly profitable is typically classified as a successful strategic planning session. But it didn't have anything to do with the analytics. It had to do with the shifting of their beliefs. Do you see how this works? We have a company here locally, Fort Myers area, residential home builder. Another case study, they were going up against their rivals, but for them, it was really globalization, particularly China. Because several years ago, the Chinese were sucking cement out of the planet. When you were in construction, you could not get access to concrete, and this is a problem, because anytime the Chinese want a natural resource, we quickly become number 2, and we were number 2. We couldn't get access. So the CEO, I was giving a talk at Fort Myers, he was in the room, he goes, "Yeah, we're sitting around the room, I'm wondering, what do I do now? I can't affect the Chinese." And then one of my vice presidents around the table at this strategic planning session thing we were doing with Don says something crazy. He says, "Why don't we buy the ready-mix plan?" I'm like, "That's a stupid idea. We're not in that business. That's ridiculous." So after we bought the ready-mix plan, guess who ended up having cement in Fort Myers, Florida? And guess who didn't get it? They went from $7 million in revenue. 2 years later, $70 million in revenue. So you want to grow your company 10 times in 2 years, it's going to take strategy. It's going to take thinking. Now, the other part was to look at the inside game. In other words, okay, we got a strategy for winning now. We had tactics. We went back, and we redid our strategic plan. So if you got a strategic planning session coming up, do it differently. Use some of the techniques that I'm using here in the workbook. In fact, on the areas here on page 7. She'll give you some ways to think through that. However, I do want you to know that if you've just finished a strategic planning session and you think, oh, it's tactics, he's right, then redo it. Come back with these insights. Because when you do that, you can start looking at this issue of passion and focus. For instance, let's turn to page, I'm jumping around here, page 4. How can you take the strategy for winning and engage your people to execute? This is a problem we heard. We had a lot of companies saying, you know what, my culture is fragmented, my people are fractured, we can't get them all together to get, how can I achieve superior strategic performance by getting my people behind me in this effort forward? So this is the $10 million answer. We found this in the Himalayas. We were on an expedition. And we try to go into these remote regions to learn something. I'm not quite sure what to find, but we said we do this every year. This happened to be in a lost civilization, and I wanted to go there because if they're leading like you're leading, that's biological, because they've had no contact with the outside world. So if their leadership style is the same as yours, or there's some components that are similar, that's probably genetic. Now, it's hard to find lost civilizations because when you do, they're not lost anymore. But this one was called Bhutan. It's only been declared to be a country in the past century. It's below China, above India, next to Tibet. It's in the middle of the Himalayas. Nobody knew it was there. Still the hardest country to enter today. About 20 years ago, they let 40 of us in. A dozen of us were on an expeditionary team. So we wanted to get to the valleys of the Bhutanese people to study them. We have to cross the passes. The passes, Himalayan passes. The lowest points of crossing are about 16,000 to 17,000 feet, higher than any mountain in the United States. So, of course, we're going to get a little bit of altitude sickness because we're not acclimating. But they seem to have adapted nicely to it. In fact, we now know genetically that the Bhutanese have evolved as a species. Their blood systems do not get affected by a lack of oxygen. There's also another species we think living deeper. They describe these other people. So I'm going to get another expedition to go back. I think there's another species on the planet back in this region that has mutated. It won't be the first time, however. There were 5 species on the planet at one time. The sapiens won. Congratulations. But not before mating with some of the others. You can do a 23andMe test. And if you went out of Africa and headed west, you have a genetically testing in your DNA for your grandmother who was Neanderthal. So there's a percentage of Neanderthal DNA. So we did some partying with some of these other groups. Anyway, on the way down, something happens on this expedition. All of a sudden, the team starts dysfunctioning. The anthropologist leading the American team looks a little upset. I go over, I said, Ethan, what's wrong? He says, I hate this part. They all fail at the end. All these expeditions fail at the end. Now, I didn't know that, but it's actually true. Most expeditions fail at the end of the expedition. When Chris Warner leads you up Everest, the bodies you have to step over that have been there for many years are all facing downhill. It was at the end. They died. But I said, Ethan, we're still alive. What are you talking about? He goes, no, I'm talking about the team, Don. Look at the team. It's not a cohesive, collaborative, functional team anymore. Everybody's now splitting up, and they're all little cliques. And listen to them. They're all starting to bitch and moan and complain about everything. And I looked over. I said, Ethan, you're right, man. We just created a company. No, I'm sorry to say that. That's it. But here's what happened. All of a sudden, we got infected by this selfishness thing. All of a sudden, it was, what can I do for me? Not what can I do for the team. So all of a sudden, like this thing you said earlier, yeah, we became selfish. But why did it happen there, not here, and here? Why did it wait to the end? Any guesses? We didn't have anything ahead of us. Yeah, there was no next path. And you know, what is it about having something ahead of a human group? How does it compel them to be with each other? They need each other, don't they? This was something that was so simple, I didn't know why we had missed it. It wasn't in any of the textbooks. But what it was this. Leadership is an act of creation, yes. Strategy is an act of creation, yes. But what do you have to create for your people? Something ahead of them, something where they need each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not created need for your people, then you'll find that they will resort to feeding on each other, and feeding on each other is going to look something like this. These are feeding behaviors because the leader has not created need. So, the $10 million question to fix this is, how can you create that need? We thought, aren't we doing that already? We have our mission statements, we have our vision statements, our purpose statements, right? But it wasn't the same thing. We looked at your mission statements. They're nice, motivational, touchy-feely, rah-rah statements. We want happy employees. We want motivated employees. But then we noticed something different about this. See, this begs a more dangerous question for you. It's the question that's not in any of your management books, not in any of your bestsellers, but it is the question. And that question is, what do your people do when they're not happy? You see, I think we've become too happy-centric. I think we've become too motivation-centric. Because I want to know, when they're not happy, when the going gets tough, do they lock arms with you and go forward? Or do they turn and run and leave you standing on the field alone? This is a dangerous question, but this is the question that separates the great companies from the wannabes. Because, you see, we don't teach this, but we should. Because it's not just a mission statement, which are great, you got to keep them. But it's something else, so we put a different name on it. We call it a compelling saga. We stole it from the Nordic tribes. That saga, you know, that's stories of God's kings and heroes. The stories that allows you to get your people to leave those safe villages, to go to the shore and get on that boat for the dark waters. Not because it's fun and motivational, and I've got the motivational posters hanging on the walls of the ship. No, it's freaking dangerous. And we're probably going to die. But if we die, they'll write poems about us. They'll sing songs about us, and we'll hear them singing from Valhalla. And we got on those boats, and civilizations expands. Every group that migrated out to populate the world were led by some sort of saga. Do you have one? Do you find days when you're standing alone on that field? Do you find days where you feel like you're getting on that boat alone? Don't do that again. You need some sort of saga. You see, this kind of goes in the opposite direction of modern management thought, because we've been teaching you to get rid of this one thing in your company. Drama, haven't you? You've heard a lot of management experts say that. The next time that happens, ask them for the peer-reviewed medical journals supporting that theory. You'll find what they'll do next is shut up. Nothing's been published. You see, humans need drama. That is why when you get rid of drama in a human group, you create a drama vacuum. What do humans do in a drama vacuum? Yeah, they fill it, right? They fill it with their mini dramas, all of these mini dramas filling a drama vacuum. You ever pull into work, you go in and feel like they're filming another episode of The Office? Which people think is a comedy. No, it's a documentary. You see, so another aha from the morning from what we've learned is you're not supposed to get rid of drama, you're supposed to create the drama. But let it be your drama, the strategic drama, the drama for winning. This is how you take a great strategic plan, a great strategic outmaneuvering of the enemy, and get your people behind you. Because you create some sort of saga, some drama that captures that winningness in a way that drives their decisions. You ever connect on flights and you get off a Southwest flight and then you got to get on like American? Notice the difference? Two different experiences. It's something about this you already know. Because you already know when you walk in to some service or store or and you People are on fire. You can feel the passion. It's palpable. And you also know when you walk into a place and it's like The Walking Dead, right? People retired on the job. You ever gone to an Apple store? Yeah, I mean, people don't go there to buy. They go there to pray. So what is it for you in your business? What's the compelling saga that allows you to align your people? And yes, you do need the visions and mission statements, but on page 5, I've got some examples for you here. A couple of reprints at the bottom. You can do some more research if you like. I broke these up into purposeful statements or enemy-based statements or ideals to be achieved. You can kind of get the sense of what these are. 3M. Why does a mining company not do mining anymore? Because it wasn't really about mining. It was about like sticky notes and things like that. Rolex, jewelry, not watches. That's why the Rolex watch doesn't work. It's not supposed to. Enemy-based sagas, Komatsu and Circle Caterpillar. They actually drew a symbol. They had a caterpillar bug with circle around it. They was Circle Caterpillar. That was their symbol for battle. Caterpillar thought it was a partnership agreement initially. One of our clients is the largest purchaser of Caterpillar equipment in the United States. That was funny when I found that out. Ideals to be achieved. Citicorp, 1915, decides to become the global financial institution back in 1915. That was their saga. Coke, but Coke with an arm's reach. I can get a Coke anywhere in the world. I'm in the Kalahari during the month of death. The rains from Angola and Africa dry up in October, so October is the month of death because you migrate or die. You have to find new water. But there's a tribe been living there for like hundreds of years. I thought, let me show up, see what we can learn. I get to this tribe, I go, and the first thing they ask me is, do I want a Coke? How does Coke do this? I do not know. Who do you think the bottom 3 are? The first one, Nike. The executives at Nike have somewhere on their body the tattoo of the Nike symbol. Did you know that? How many of you have your company logo tattooed to your flesh? I'm just checking. Okay, after lunch, there's a service. How many have customers who have your company logo tattooed to their flesh? Guys, come on. That's called market branding. I literally have a dozen companies that have pictures of their customers with their logos. Some are technology, some are sports, some are this, some are that. There's a coffee house in San Francisco, a used car lot in New Brunswick, Canada. This guy has used everything I'm teaching you here. He now can no longer be used by the Canadian government because when they put him in their industry surveys, it's just him and everybody else is at 0. So they pull him out, so at least they have a spread. As compensation, they put him in the new car category, even though he's never sold a new car in his life. But even in the new car category, he's in the top 5% of performers in Canada. So these are all live case studies of applying what I'm teaching you here. Second one, Walmart. Third, FedEx, yeah, but I bet you didn't know that the real saga was to beat the UPS communist bastards. Still is right? It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I didn't realize it, but they exposed Smith in front of his people, talking about these red, white, and blue FedEx trucks going into battle against the brown shirts. He makes this whole thing up, right? We make it up. We're creating. No, the UPS communists, of course not. At least not all of them, but he just made up the game. And so for you this morning, you got to ask yourself a question. Do you have a game? Do you have a strategy for winning? Do people believe in it? Do they have a saga? Do they have something that inspires them with passion for that strategic result so much that they're willing to do 2 things that we do not teach in our business schools? The willingness to suffer and to sacrifice. You see, that's what the magic is. If you have people around you willing to suffer and sacrifice for the cause, you will outmaneuver. You will perform. And I'm giving you case studies this morning. Companies that grow 10 times their size when they put this in play. Got a few minutes for questions before we take a break for lunch. I know I've hit you with a lot of stuff here. Oh, by the way, on the back, some people were mentioning about page 6. Before we get to your questions, who do you think the first one is? These are newer companies now. Let there be shoes. Zappos. Who's the second one? Close. Amazon. Third? That was actually Steve Jobs, Apple. But it's, I get that a lot now. That's funny. You would think so. Who's for? You might have taken them here to this conference from the airport. Uber, yes. And the fifth one? That's actually Elon Musk. That's Elon Musk. I had somebody in an audience say, you know what? He said, I'm not going to hire Sharon. It was an engineering conference. I said, why not? He says, she's a brilliant engineer. I paid her twice as much to work for me, but I'll ruin her. I said, why? She works for Elon Musk. Until I have a saga that's comparable, it's just going to be a job, and I'm just going to ruin her. So think about that as you go even to attract or sustain employees, good talent. People want to work for companies that are up to something. So think about that too. I know you have a speaker tomorrow, I think, on talent. So think about applying this in that area as well. Because, you know, I know that when you hire people, we notice that you're hiring on resumes, which is basically what they did and how they did it, right? Put into a very creative exercise, a writing exercise. But when you fire people, we notice you kept firing people on behavior, didn't you? Or don't you? Sure you do. So start hiring on behavior. You'll start seeing a different result. Page 6 at the bottom there in that box. What we found out too, and this is something else I want you to think about, is that people don't really follow leaders. I know we've been telling you the followers follow leaders, but they don't. We found out from this research, they follow the story you represent, the saga you represent. So ask yourself, what is the story I represent? Because that's who they're following. When Apple Computer funded our creation research, which is great, they're letting us teach us to you too, if you want to know more about that. Steve Jobs dies. They write books about Steve. What do they say about his leadership style? Sucks. I mean, I hear the word asshole used a lot. This guy violated everything we teach in business school about how to be a great manager, right? But yet he creates the most powerful company in the world. How did they do that? What proves this point? They weren't following him. They were following his story. Now, by the way, I'm not telling you to go back to being an asshole tomorrow, okay? Because I had some people say, too late. But what what I want you to think about is, what is that story? What is that saga you represent? Because if you have a powerful, real strategy captured in a saga, you're going to penetrate markets faster. This is what we have found out. Okay, I know we're up against lunch. I'm in the death zone here between lunch and you. But I want to make sure you've got ideas to put into action. Questions you have. Now's a good time. Yes?
If your company has multiple divisions or layers, you talk about the saga, does that exist on a divisional level and a company level?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah, for companies, depending on size, what we find is that it's good to have an overarching saga for the company itself. Then the divisions that are inside could have their own as well that are pertinent to them, as long as they support the overarching saga. You do not want them going out this way, and that's that part. The only reason you would have them go out the other way is if maybe you have a holding company and your divisions are actually going after different customers, different strategies for winning, and there's no real relationship, in which case it's really more of a financial conglomeration, which is fine, but yeah, you have to be sure about that. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yes?
I wanted to tell you, I saw you at a Vistage meeting a few years ago and implemented a lot of your stuff. Works.
Oh, thank you. There, you got to have an unsolicited case study right here in the front row. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But
Yeah.
And that worked very well too. But I found that it's a constant recreation process,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of where I struggle now because,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so what's,
Yeah, that's a very good point. You see, time is never really on your side because when you look at the return on energy invested into a system, you know, you have these growth curves, and what happens is at some point you start seeing diminishing sets of returns, and that's the time to start on new curves, you see, like that. So you see these phases in industry, which means that for U.S. companies generally, these time frames go out between maybe one to, I'd say 2 to 3 years, and it depends on which sector you're on. You can be longer in some industries. So you're going to have to reinvent the saga, you know, at that point, because things are going to change. And also what happens over time, we notice, is that your pricing for your products and services, this is something else that comes out of a strategic planning session when you're looking at belief shifting, is over time, the curve goes something like this. Remember the first time you bought a cell phone? $1,000 brick, right? And now you get them for free. Because what happens is more competition emerges, and all of a sudden people get more educated, and so bargaining power heats up. What this does for you, though, is it raises a question. And the question is, where do you want to play? Because there's a marker here. On one side, you're the differentiated player, and this is how you win business, and by differentiating yourself. And then over here, you're more of a commodity player, and it's really around pricing. See, because over here, you have the price option, and over here, you really have some sort of value that's defined. The problem we find is when we work with companies to grow them faster, is sometimes there's strategic confusion. What strategic confusion means is that the company has to make a choice. They either have to let that stuff go over time and keep refilling the pipeline, or they have to lead the way down, unbundle things and keep driving the cost down. And you can win in either section, but what confusion comes in is we find companies over here that say, no, we're a differentiated player, but they end up down here. And when you try to win here with a differentiation strategy, you fail. So you have to choose which side you're on. So even over time, you may have a strategy that works really well, but over time you may have to change it or redefine what differentiation means. So thank you. Yeah. This is an ongoing climb for you. It doesn't stop. Because if you let it stop, if you just set something in motion and you find that your company is heading down, it's going to keep going. You got to unhook. You have to set up the next stage. Business is a dynamic enterprise, and it's all about creation.
so the second part is, so I recreate sagas all the time, so,
Mhm.
and, they're pretty much, at this point, my people have been there a long time, so they've seen the cycle over the past 2 years.
Oh, good.
And they're like, what's next? So they're starting to pick up my whole thing here, so.
Good. So they know
So they
something.
know what's going on.
Something's got to change, right?
Right.
Because battlefield shift, customer shift.
Yeah, okay. And I just, we have to do this. This is, that wasn't fun anymore. We did that. Now this is fun.
Yeah,
So
that's a good way to look at it. And sometimes, the market doesn't wait for us. Right now we have retail clients that are under total threat from Amazon. Nobody saw that coming. They were trying to compete according to the beliefs of retail industry. Amazon was like, we don't care about your beliefs about retail. We're going to provide access that's never been provided before. And so it's totally disrupting the entire world. Make sense? Was today valuable for you? Just give you something to think about. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for bringing me, and I really appreciate it. I know your time's valuable. You got lunch coming up. So I'm going to hang around if there's any questions. I threw a lot of stuff on you here. By the way, I do know that sometimes in art class, people are like, where do I start? There's a survey on the back here. If you want feedback on where your company should begin in applying this, you can fill that out, get it to me, and we'll get back to you with some stuff. We've been collecting thousands of points of data from companies going through this, and it's going to be different for every one of you. So if you want that, you can leave that, or if you have some question, I'll be hanging around, or you can write something on your card. I'll get back to you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the risk of bringing me in here. Now go have lunch. Enjoy yourself. Have a great day.